David, thanks for joining us on Men's Wealth on this mental health series that we're busy with on the podcast, and thanks for sharing your story today. David, so as a start, just tell us about your journey on mental health and just the challenges that you've been facing over the past few years.
No, thanks, Johan. Great to share with you and the listeners. Look, I would say it's an integral part of my life. It doesn't define who I am, but it's something I'm constantly aware of, and it has been a big part of my journey, being suffering from depression. And it really started in my early 20s. So that's going on 20 odd, just under 30 years ago, 25 years ago. And I grew up in a fantastic Christian home. Although because of the Christian tradition we grew up in, we were separate from everything. So I didn't take part in most things at school or after school with friends, etc. So life was incredibly lonely. And it really came to a head in the early 20s when, you had to start. I wasn't allowed to go to university, and then a girl I met on holiday actually broke my heart. I think that was the first time where I really felt or experienced depression. And it's kind of easy when one doesn't suffer depression to actually say, well, I'm all cool. And you can say to yourself, well, what's it all about? But when one's in the middle of a depressive episode, one really can't see the wood for the trees. And I would say that, life was a dark tunnel with no light at the end of it. And and that was quite a journey. In my early 20s, I took medication. I had low blood pressure at that time as well, so took multiple types of medication, which I hated. And then just have learned over the years to deal with it. Many years, I don't know if Johan wanted me to come to nowadays, but they were in my early to mid 20s. It was kind of learning how to deal with it. In those days, I then did a lot of running. And in fact, it helped me. That actually helped me so much that I ended up actually wanting to start running groups to help those suffering from depression, because it helped me so much. I think in some ways it became an unhealthy habit, because I would go for these long 4-hour runs on a Saturday morning and kind of leave it all out on the road, which probably wasn't the most healthy thing to do. And we can talk about just now, Johan, as to how one can deal with these things healthily. But I guess in the last few years, in the last 10, 12 years, before we moved to Johannesburg about 12 years ago, I did start on medication again, fluoxetine. Kind of managed it fine. There were times that I wanted to go off it, and then stayed on it and have over the years. Recently I've changed to another medication, a more modern version of fluoxetine. And pretty much most years but most of the time, actually I'm 100%. I typically do get melancholic, which is kind of I feel things deeply, and that can sink to depression if I'm not careful. But like during COVID was, I think, the first time in many years that I really was hit quite badly. In the middle of COVID, I heard that my brother had separated from his wife, and my sister-in-law had separated from her husband. I think that hit me quite deeply. And then for about 2 weeks, it was dark days. It was in those days, it was really kind of a heaviness on my chest, below my neck. So and we can talk about how I dealt with it at the time. And then since then, about maybe another week. Prior to that, maybe a day or two at a time. And that's kind of the way it's kind of been.
Okay, and David, just coming back to that in your 20s when you first realized, so you just told us that you were a bit of a loner in high school and after school, and then what made you realize that you suffered or you have depression? So you had this breakup with this girl. Was there what was the symptoms? What made you realize that you had depression?
So that's part of the journey, Johan, is actually the learning of how to actually define the way I am. And sometimes, and this is where my wife has come in quite a lot, where like, how are you feeling? And actually just that expression of learning how to express your feeling can take decades, unfortunately. And in my early 20s, I would say there was a sense of immaturity, not immaturity, I mean, I'm at that age. From a perspective, I didn't really have the skill set to even define the way I was feeling. And that's kind of part of the challenge is, am I depressed? Am I anxious? Am I, what am I experiencing? And I think that's part of the challenge is to help with definition. So funny enough, the girl that I kind of broke up with, her mother was a psychologist, and she sent me some materials which was around depression. So that was quite funny.
Okay, so she broke up with you and she actually helped you a bit.
It's quite ironic, but anyway, she sent me something, and the one thing I remember, and I remember it to this day, is the phrase "there is always hope." I can't remember whether the mother said it or whether it was in the materials that in those days you faxed through materials.
Yeah.
And the phrase "there is always hope" has stuck out with me, and it's probably the main thing that's kept me on the straight and narrow over all these years. And obviously, we as Christians, the hope is in Jesus. The hope is in our faith. The hope is in it's in the community that we're in. And so hope is more than just the word hope. But the definition of that is, for me, is a beautiful thing. And even us talking about it now, intellectually, we get it. But when one's in the midst of deep depression, one has to hold on to something. I actually feel very emotional thinking about it now, because I was actually saying to you before the recording is, I'm fine, and 99% of the time I'm actually fine. I'm not feeling depressed, not even feeling melancholic. I'm feeling fantastic. But even just preparing for our time now it helped me engage that feeling of when one is in the deep depression, and one has to hold on to something. And when we hear the preaching of hold on to Jesus or hold on to hope, it's a very real thing, because that's all you've got. That's all you've got. You can't say to someone, snap out of it. It's just, it's logical, but you can't. And we can talk about how one eases and what the techniques are used about easing out of it. But holding on to something and then learning the tools of how am I feeling is some of the techniques to work through that process.
Sure, thanks, David. And tell me, so just as a man, as a young man in your 20s, and then obviously getting married and having kids and growing a business, how has this impacted your, let's say the past 20 years in your marriage and your relationship with your kids and in business? Just maybe share that with us, the good and the bad things that impacted your life over the past few years.
Yeah, I've been very fortunate with the wife I've married, and I come from a very productivity-based family, and my wife says, "Well, how does your staff members feel about this?" And I thought, "Well, why is that even a factor?" And so she's used to the whole feeling and relational side of things, and I've learned from that, and so she's automatically more sympathetic. Look, I can't say that my depression has been debilitating to the way I operate, as in it's made me functionally unworkable, and I sympathize with those folk and those men that go through that. But I think a supportive spouse is incredibly important, and I think one of the things about going through the journey is that one feels like a failure. It's so frustrating because you feel like a failure as a man, and you obviously want, not that you want to impress your wife, but you want to feel like you're strong for your family and your wife. And what is a beautiful thing is that if one's wife is able to empathetic and support, and that needs quite a lot of wisdom from both parties, to be honest. I think the person being depressed, the man being depressed, needs to have some kind of self-awareness and grow in wanting to fight the thing. And the wife, I think, has to be very lovingly and supportive, because for me, it was this question of, but I'm failing as a man. I'm failing in supporting I can't be that strong. I don't feel I can be that strong person in this position. And I think my wife has learned just to let me go through the flow. Let me learn and every now and again she'll check in, how am I doing, how am I feeling, and sometimes I'll say, but I can't describe it. I don't know how to describe it, and she's patient enough to let that be. So from a debilitation perspective, for those around me, I mean, in every now and again, in the years gone by, in the early days of my new business, I would say to my team, look, I'm just not going to be available for the next day. And in my wife, it really hasn't been, unfortunately, a major factor. And I think partly because of my own personal self-awareness journey, and then also her love and support and patience.
And tell me, is it difficult for you to share this journey with other men because of just being a man? And you say that obviously it's something that you become self-aware. We've all, as men, we've got some pride. We've got, we want to be the guys who are strong. So has it ever been an issue for you to speak to other men about it because of pride and because of just wanting to be a strong man?
I can't say that. I mean, I'm not saying, I guess in the early days I didn't want people to know about it, but I'm as open as it can be. I mean, I don't shout it on the treetops. I'm not here to preach it, but I'm also not afraid to be open about it. Maybe I'm just lucky. I mean, I have my own self-confidence issues, but this is not one of them. So I'm very happy to share. And in some ways, I think I've been gifted on that, because I know it's not easy for many men, but it's not a problem for me.
And tell me, so you went for some help. Did you ever go and see psychologists, or was it just a matter of going to the doctor and getting some medication, or how was your process in getting help for this, from a medical point of view?
From a medical perspective, look, fortunately and I'm not sure whether everyone knows it, but you would know it, Johan, from your financial planning side, is the PMB, the prescribed minimum benefits. I think it's a beautiful thing, and I'm unashamedly taking advantage of that, so that you get 15 free sessions with a psychologist if you are diagnosed with depression. And so I'm actively using that for the psychologist. In the past, I didn't go to psychologists a lot, and that is quite a challenge. So right now, for me, it's super easy. I'll go to a psychologist tomorrow, straight away. But in the early days, I want to acknowledge the fact that it is a major challenge, and it could be a hurdle for folk. And because it's not easy it's not necessarily always a pride thing. It's like, I don't know what to do. And I've never spoken about my feelings before. So it's like, I've never ridden a bicycle before. Now you got me to ride a bicycle. Or now you're saying to go to a psychologist. Now I would say to you, going to a psychologist is incredibly helpful, and it's one of the tools that one could use. I'm not saying it's the only tool or a must tool, but so give yourself the grace I think folks should give themselves the grace to learn how to express their feelings, and learn the skill of understanding of how to express one's feelings. So in recent years, I'm using a psychologist. In the past, I can't say I did. I've used medication. And there again, I didn't really want to use medication in the beginning, but what someone explained to me was, it's like if you've got a broken arm, you'll have a cast around that broken arm. And the medication is no different. It's not that you lack faith. It's not that Jesus hasn't healed you. It's that the Lord's given us a tool, which is medication. Now, I'm also of the opinion that medication doesn't work for everyone. I'm fortunate that the medication I use works for me. And number two, it doesn't give many or any side effects that I'm aware of, at least. So medication is just one of the tools. The psychologist is one of the tools. And I mean, there's a bunch of others which I can refer to, but I think one's got to patiently work through the different tools that are available. I mean, for example, am I getting enough sleep? Am I watching too much social media? I mean, just last week, I was looking at LinkedIn, and LinkedIn for me is way more dangerous than the FOMO of seeing all these guys do these sexy kind of lekker posts, and it makes me feel so inadequate that I'm not like as fancy on them on their business. And the next hour was like, my wife was saying to me, what's going on with you? Why are you in such a bad mood? And so the inputs that we're putting into our mind is something that we should look at. Am I having too much alcohol, for example? Am I eating wrongly? These are all tools that we need to look at. Am I in community? Am I too inward looking? That maybe I should go and serve someone and get out of my own head. Now, I'm not a psychologist, so I can't give too much advice here, but in my experience, exploring all these little options and seeing what works means that one shouldn't have too many excuses to live in the funk forever. In other words, there are tools. I mean, our pastor, someone like Pastor Sergey that we know so well and love so much, wisdom with pastors like that. There are experts, Christian psychologists. There are non-Christian psychologists. There are pastors. There are friends that have been through similar experiences. These are all resources that we can reach out to and use. But also, I don't want to pressure, because if I'm in the middle of depression, someone coming to me with a whole lot of list of solutions is not really going to cut it. And I'm not saying it's an excuse, but I'm putting myself in that experience of being in a major low. It's with wisdom and patience, both the person suffering from depression and those around that person can move forward in a redemptive kind of process.
Sure. Oh, that's very good. And David, you mentioned a very important thing, I think, for me in the beginning, just putting your faith, your Christianity and your relationship with Jesus as a central point in this whole journey. And I think what I've heard from men and what I've read about is that a lot of men blame themselves, or they think that there's something wrong with them because they've got a tight relationship with the Lord. They're not getting healed from depression. Something's wrong with them. Something's wrong with their faith. So maybe just on your whole journey and Jesus. Let's talk about the depression and Jesus. So where in your journey has Jesus been throughout this past 20 or so years with depression?
You know that story, Johan, where you got those two footprints going along the beach, and then you see the one footprint, right? And then it says, well, there's only one set of footprints because the Lord is carrying you.
Yeah.
And that's the story of it. Because at the time you don't believe it, but it's true. In hindsight, those dark moments are incredibly redemptive, because in hindsight you say, but I'm so thankful for those for that experience, because that has brought me. I've had to hold on. So sorry. Sometimes you can say you've got to hold on to faith. You've got to hold on to hope. Where you got to hold on to. But I actually, sometimes you don't actually have that strength to hold on. It's only because the Lord's holding on to you that you get through.
Sure.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's not, you've got to hold on to hope. And I'll say, there's nothing, there's always hope. It's because the Lord's holding on to us as me, as opposed to, because I don't have the strength sometimes. When you're in the middle of depression, I don't have what it takes to hold on. And that's the beauty of in hindsight, in those dark moments, and you're actually thankful for it, because my dark days in my 20s is what's laid the foundation for my faith now with my family. And I'm not saying I'm living in perfect faith or in harmony or in holiness, but those times where you cast onto God with everything is what actually lays the foundations for your future, for your future philosophies and your future belief systems. So I'm thankful. In hindsight, I wouldn't. Sorry about being emotional. I wouldn't change it for the world. But man, those are dark moments, and I'm thankful for the Lord to build me on a sanctification process and journey.
Wow, no, that's powerful. And David, maybe as just as a closing, you mentioned earlier that you've got some techniques, when you realize something is happening or something gets said, and you might fall into this mindset of going into a depression state again. Give us some practical tools. What do you do at that point?
Yeah, if I can, I'm into my late 40s now, and if I can, and it's something which I'm really deep in my heart about, is the self-awareness that we have, growing in self-awareness. And that means, talking about your feelings, but growing in self-awareness means that in your late 40s, you're not going to make stupid decisions like I've seen many men make at this age. Have that self-awareness. And so it's a journey of psychologist, therapy, and sometimes these are wrong kind of connotations, but just getting to know yourself and listening to this kind of podcast, I think is a good thing. Knowing what are your trigger points, learning yourself over time. Don't drink that wine if it's going to make you feel bad. Don't watch that stuff if it's going to put you in a bad mood. Worship the word. When you worship when you're in a good mood, not only when you're bad. I remember in that deep depression in COVID, when we were in Joburg, I'm going to see a victory by vertical worship. I would listen to that. I'd go for a 40-minute run, and I would listen to that song on repeat. I'm going to see a victory. You got to confess those good things to yourself. Go to a psychologist. Be open. We talk about accountability as Christian men. There again, that sounds like an onerous kind of obligation, but building not only the friends that I'm going to watch rugby with or play touch rugby with, it's those friends where I can talk about this stuff. And it's not talking about being heavy all day, but having this openness. I'm feeling crappy today, dude. I'm like, can we pray about it? Looking outwards. So there again, by the way, just before I forget, there's a great video series called The Black Dog. I think Churchill referred to it in his writings, his depression, about the black dog. I can highly recommend that one watches. You can see on YouTube, there's plenty of videos around on that, the black dog. That for me is probably the most helpful tool to describe, even to a friend, even to one's wife, what I'm feeling about what depression is carrying this black dog, and I put it in its place and so forth. So lastly, my last comment is I would like to finish. Watch The Black Dog, and remember, there's always hope. Those are two things that, if I'm only allowed to say two things, those are the two things that I would say.
Sure. David, powerful, and thanks for sharing us your story and being vulnerable and in sharing this. I'm sure it's gonna really impact a lot of men. Thanks for that, and I appreciate your time, man, and enjoy Cape Town, and greetings here from Joburg, man.
Fantastic. Thanks, Johan. It's great to chat.
Thanks, David. Cool, man.